Welcome. We'll get started shortly. Before we begin, here's how to earn continuing professional education credit for attending this session. There are no polling questions or attendance checks. Instead, you will demonstrate your knowledge by taking a brief multiple-choice quiz using the Earmark app. Visit earmark.app in your web browser. You can also download the mobile app by scanning the QR code on the screen. Log in, or if you're new, create your free account. Be sure to use a valid email address because that's where we'll send your course completion certificates. From the home screen, scroll down to find the course. You can also tap the magnifying glass icon to search for the course. Tap on the course artwork, then the Enroll button. On the Course tab, you'll find the recording and quiz questions. Complete the quiz to earn your CPE certificate. It takes us a few days to create the course on the app, so if you are attending this session live, please wait a few days. We'll email you a link to the course when it is ready. If you have questions or need help, email us at support@earmarkcpe.com. And now, on to the event.
Hello and welcome to today's Earmark webinar, Mistakes We Made So You Don't Have to in Outsourced Staffing. My name is Joel from the Earmark team. If you have any questions or comments, please use the comment section. I'll be monitoring that. And with that, I will turn it over to our hosts for today's webinar, Kristen Keats and Martin Moll.
Thank you, Joel. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. My name's Kristen. As Joel said, this is my partner, Martin Moll. We're going to be bringing you, we're going to get vulnerable with you guys today and tell you all the mistakes that we made with our outsourced staffing team so that you don't have to. So this webinar is great for anyone who is already working with an outsourced team, or maybe you're just thinking about it and want to understand more about how it works and kind of the nitty gritty and what does that look like day to day. So that's the kind of thing that we want to cover in this webinar. So thank you for joining us. We're glad that you're here. And please shoot over your questions for us because we'd love to answer as many as we can live while we are here on the webinar. So first, a little bit about me. I've been a CPA for at least 25 years. I stopped counting after a while. Most of my career has been in tax. Take from that what you will. I mainly work with small businesses as my clients, owner-managed businesses, and do some individual tax as well. My experience in working with an offshore or international team began when I worked for a larger firm starting in 2018. I worked with an outsourced team out of India and was very life-changing for me to have access to that type of talent that worked on the other side of the world. I had heard about firms doing this kind of outsourcing, but prior to that, I had either worked for myself or I'd been at a local firm, so we didn't really have access to those kinds of teams. And after I did get access to that, it really, like I said, was a game changer for me and made me start thinking about how to make this resource available for more firm owners or folks like me that are running their own practices and really just need that help and support that we maybe aren't able to find here in the US. So part of that journey meant that I became a co-founder of Cadencia, which is a staffing agency in Guadalajara, Mexico. I do have a tax firm called Sherwood Tax and Accounting just outside of Portland, Oregon. And Martin and I are also both founders of Breakaway Bookkeeping and Advising. So we've been a little busy the last few years with some of these endeavors, but my main life mission is to bring joy to accounting. So that's why I've got my fingers in all these things, because I believe each of these solves a different problem for us that we've been having in the accounting industry. So that is my background. I'm going to hand it over to Martin. He can tell you a little bit about himself.
Thank you, Kristen. Great introduction. And yeah, like Kristen, I've worked with a near or offshore team for a long time, and I've been in public accounting longer than Kristen has. Other than a couple years stint in practicing law, I've been in big four firms. I've been in regional firms, including the one where I led as CEO and managing partner. And then, like Kristen said, worked with smaller firms such as Breakaway Bookkeeping and Advising, although it's not so small anymore. And when I was at Aldrich is when I was first exposed to an offshore team. And I got to be honest, and this was, I think maybe at the time they might have had 5 or 6 people in Coimbatore, India. And when I expressed interest in it, it was really because I wanted to visit to India. So that was really the reason that I'm like, well, I think I'd like to go to India. And I did. And I've now been there, I think, 17 times at last count. When I went there, though, like Kristen, it was life-changing. And I saw, and we're going to talk about this, I saw the benefit of, certainly there's labor arbitrage. That's why many of you are here. It's why many are thinking about it. It's like, I can't find staff. And when I do, the salary is just, I can't make money at what I have to pay a starting CPA. And that's real, and we'll talk about it. But what we realized and discovered was that there's so many other tangential benefits of having an offshore team. Those actually put all together can be even more beneficial than simply the cost savings. But we made so many mistakes in creating that, and that's really what. And so whether it's a firm of of 300 or 400 or 500 people, or whether it's a firm of 5, we want to share the mistakes that we made through the course of either in India or Mexico, so that if you're thinking about it, you probably make a few mistakes as well, but at least you won't make as many, honestly, as we did.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that's actually why we decided to do this webinar together, because Martin is really bringing that larger firm experience, and frankly, just like the longer term experience. Whereas I can kind of bring it from my firm owner practitioner standpoint. I've got a smaller team. So my team here at Sherwood Tax, we've got 8 people total, and 4 of them are located in Mexico. On our breakaway team, we generally, our advisors are working with an India team that is a team of 3. So we're just kind of bringing our different perspectives to the webinar here for you guys. Okay, so first we can talk about the benefits of working with the remote team. As Martin and I have kind of talked about, really, what you're hearing about offshoring or outsourced talent right now, you're probably getting barraged, as we are, from all these folks providing outsourced services, and it's kind of hard to work through the noise. But you may have heard of firms doing it successfully. So why are firms doing this? What is the benefit of doing it? And mainly, it's creating scale for your firm. Right now, a lot of the labor that is in India, the Philippines, or even Mexico is less expensive than it is in the US. I believe they don't quite have the level of burnout that we have with our US team. So really it's accessing talent that we might not be getting. We've all heard about the talent pipeline just getting less and less and less. The boomers are retiring. It's creating a lot of pressure on our industry. So in my mind as a firm owner, I'm like, well, I'm going to need to look outside just the US market to really try to find those talented individuals that I can grow. Because it's not just about finding them to begin with. I need to find folks who are going to stay with my firm and grow with me. I don't want this just revolving door of talent that I continually am investing time and training in just to have them leave and go, have someone else get the benefit of that. What I found, though, and also working with a lot of the outsourced team members, is that there's a little less ego and a little more willingness to work. For example, when I worked at a larger firm, sometimes you might ask one of the staff people to do a bookkeeping job, or, I just need to get this bank reconciliation done. And you get a little bit of like, well, I have a accounting degree, like I'm not doing that. And it's like, this is accounting, like sometimes we just need to get the things done. And I feel like there's a little less of that when I'm working with my outsourced team. And Martin kind of talked about this benefit too, is that I just feel like it has helped me as a person to be able to work with these other team members, learn about their cultures, be able to travel to where they are, meet their families. For me, it's been one of the best benefits of working with that outsourced team, is really just kind of broadening my own horizons on that.
And love that, Kristen. A few other things I'd toss in on the lack of ego and willingness to work, because if you think about it, it's just a different context. So we've all been there, right? Or you're there right now. Think about being a staff or a senior or a manager in a public accounting firm. You've got to do all the things, the technical piece, learning the software, managing clients. But in the back of your mind, you also have, if I want to make partner, I've got to do business development. So I've got to get out there and I've got to do the lunches and the dinners, got to attend the associations. So there's a lot more pull on our US staff who want to be successful, because ultimately their ultimate career goal, it seems to have changed a little bit, but is to be partner, to do business development, to build a book of business. Well, in an offshore team, right? As good as they are, and they're amazing, and they're certainly social and could build a book of business if they're in the States, but they're not. So their highest calling is to be the best client service accountant that they can possibly be. So it scrapes the sidewalk and really lets them focus on a portion of what you expect your US based staff. And I still remember, in fact, it might have been that first trip to India, and I would go and talk to some of the staff, and I'm like, well, what are you doing? They're like, oh, I'm reading the Internal Revenue Code. I'm like, you're reading the code? And I'm like, okay, why? It's like, well, I've got some downtime. So I want to make sure that I'm doing what I can to sharpen my skills and get better at what I do. So I'm going to read your blessed US tax code. And because again, they're not needing to go to Rotary, they're not thinking about the other, and so it's not better or worse, it's just different. And then if you think about it, that's what then allows your stateside staff to certainly get good technically, but they can put more time and energy and effort into client maintenance and client development. So it's taking a bunch of different tasks and allocating them and concentrating them in one place, offshore or nearshore, and then with your US-based staff or stateside staff in a different way. So it's just different. The other thing I would say that I can tell you now from experience, both in Guadalajara, Mexico, as well as in India, working for a US company is still prestigious. So we are able to attract and retain a really high caliber of people because we're like, well, come and work for a US company. So that actually, so we tend to get a higher caliber, and we tend to kind of are able to get some of the best and brightest in any, and that's true with our peers, with whether it's TOA or anybody, Integrity. They're part of their calling card is that they get to work with US or UK or Australian companies, and those are premier and premium jobs. Did I miss anything, yes. Chris?
No, thank you. No, I'm glad that you added that color in there. The only thing I just wanted to say before we leave the slide is I wanted to shout out the wonderful Michelle Cervantes, whose lovely face is on the slide, because she loves her. So these folks that are pictured in our slides, these are our real people. This is our team. So I wanted to make sure that we included them when we're talking about them. Okay, so this is why you're all here. What's the catch in working with a remote team? What are the pitfalls? What are the things that we should look out for? So my next slide, Martin, this is a quote from you. So you can talk about this, why you said this and what the context is for this.
This is what I found years ago when I was working with my prior firm, and certainly with clients that we work with at Cadencia. They'll come to us and say, it's not working because of this, this, and this. And what we'll realize, it has nothing to do with the Mexico staff. It has everything to do with the fact that they have inherent weaknesses in their processes that an offshore team just really highlights and puts some magnifier on it, because the ability to walk down the hall or pick up the phone hides a lot of sins. So as good as we are, right? You think about a firm and you've got all these processes in place, but when you want something done, what do you tend to do? You pick up the phone, you call the staff person, you say, hey, can you get this? Because I just got a call from a client. Well, that is a natural reaction, and we certainly don't blame you, but you're actually killing your processes. And in the long run, slowing down your workflow, making you more less efficient, and then ultimately less profitable.
Yeah, agreed. And the only other thing that I'll add to that is that, during the pandemic, we were all forced to be remote, right? And so I think it's really interesting now post-pandemic that a lot of firms are returning to office, because you're right, it takes a little more effort on the front end or when anything changes, like, oh, well, we got this new app that we're working with, we've got a new software. So that means that we now need to modify our standard operating procedures. It means we need to, for example, we use Carbon in our firm. So that means I have to change the template. So it's extra effort on the front end. And I almost wonder if, now that companies are returning to office, if they're just it's just too hard, we just don't want to deal with that. But then you see, I don't know if you guys are on accounting Reddit, that's the main complaint that I'm hearing now is my firm's having me return to office, or a recruiter told me something was hybrid, but that means you're in the office 4 days a week. So this, I think that focusing on your processes will help the firm overall, and not just necessarily even for remote staff. But okay, so here is our mistake number one. lacking the onboarding. And I could say I definitely made this mistake. It's like, oh, this person's starting on Monday. Great. And then you kind of forget about it. And then they kind of show up and you're like, oh, wait, are they in this system? Do we have an email? Are they invited to our regular meetings that we're having? It's like, you don't want to just be behind the 8 ball, because by the way, that feels terrible for anybody who's at their first day on the job and people forget that they're showing up, or that it's not kind of a bigger deal. Because I think everyone that's on this call has been on a job for the first day, and you are nervous and you don't know what to wear, and they're already going through all that. And so what we've tried to do is really nailing down our onboarding procedures. And by the way, when we talk about our procedures, they are never static. They're always changing. We're always adding things in there. But make sure that as part of your onboarding, that there's really a clear path, that you don't necessarily, because again, we're not in the office. You don't have a buddy maybe sitting next to them for the whole day and helping them fill out paperwork or whatever we used to do. They're going to kind of need to follow the path on their own and do things on their own. And so what we've done is create that step-by-step, what training they need to attend, what meetings they need to make sure that they're a part of, access to all of their systems. And then after we do that, we obviously make sure that we have now our team is small, so we're able to do an entire group meeting. But maybe for larger firms, that means that whatever team they're going to be working on, or if there's a niche part of the practice that they're going to be a part of, that there is some kind of welcoming, meeting or something where they can really get to know folks face to face if possible. Now, if you're working with, I know, larger outsourced organizations, maybe Martin, you can talk more about this, but so for example, I'm talking about teams where you hire an individual person that works directly for you. I know that there's other outsourcers that you may not know exactly who's on your team, but you're still going to want to be prepared internally for what that would mean to be working with this new kind of facet of staffing for your firm.
Couldn't agree more. And yeah, a couple comments. First would be, so when you think about onboarding starts maybe a month before the person starts, and maybe even longer if you're new to an offshore and nearshore team. So this is your first time. It's probably 2 or 3 months, and it's socializing the concept with all of your team, right? Why are we doing this? Why, this is not, I'm not replacing your job. For God's sakes, it's so hard to, it's like, I'm not replacing you. This is a benefit to you. And be open and honest with all the reasons why, everything that you're thinking about creating an onboarding or an offshore team, share that with your team. Share that with your receptionist, share that with the file clerk, the office manager, so that they are as excited as you are. Because one of the things that we'll find is great excitement. The managing partner loves this. Let's go. And then people are like, yet another, here we go, another crazy idea. Let's just ignore it and this will pass too. And we've had some where the team has not made the staff person feel welcome. And then it's just a big waste of everybody's time. So really think about building the case way before the person starts, building a sense of excitement. And then, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but making sure that there's a buddy. In larger firms, one of the firms that I've spoken with that I think has a really good idea is, so they have a office managing partner for the Tallahassee office, and office managing partner for the Miami office. Then they have a managing partner for all of their remote team. And that's not just offshore, that's remote. So if they happen to have a person in Oklahoma City or a person in Guadalajara, Mexico, it's the same. And that partner is in charge of making sure that they're as integrated into the firm as any of the other teams. So, you may have a staff picnic, and I see on LinkedIn all these wonderful events. Well, make sure that the remote team is having a virtual happy hour, a virtual scavenger hunt, all those things that I dread personally, but that are really, really great to engage your team. Because and part of this goes to, it's just the right thing, and part of this goes to, and again, we'll chat a little bit about it, but Kristen hears me say this all the time, the value of an inspired worker is at least 3 times more than someone's just showing up, right? So if you have someone who rides for your brand, who believes in your culture, is excited about where you're going as a firm, you're going to get better output. And that's true whether they're down the hall or whether they're halfway across the world.
Yeah. And which, by the way, this is why we're doing this, right? It's like, if this is, we've already kind of jumped into mistakes, but like if we rewind a bit and say like, why is your firm doing this? Well, it's a part of a larger strategy. And so when we talk about like things not working or things failing, like it's a big deal, because if you've already decided that this is going to be a part of your strategy, not only is it important for your own firm and the morale there to make sure that things are successful and they work, but like it can be really rough on everybody involved if it doesn't, work out. So that's why I think it's just so important, like we're saying, to lay that groundwork and make that investment from day one.
We're not pulling any punches by saying inept.
No, Martin, I'm going to have a coughing attack. So can you just like
Okay.
start on this one and I'll jump in a sec?
So training is key, right? I mean, and for those of you who have been in the industry for a while, I just think about your own experiences of, the way that we were trained. And I'm going to put myself in one category. The way where we were trained is not the way young staff are used to being trained. And that makes all the difference in the world. So having a good training program, making sure that it's ongoing, that there's a sense of constant learning, is critical. And then Kristen will talk about, if she's able to speak now, some of the more specifics.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I just need a little sip of tea there. Getting over my little cold I had last week. Okay, so so what we've done for this specifically is, like Martin was saying, back in our day, the way that we learned was we would do a tax return and it would go to the senior to get reviewed, and we get a page full or two of review notes that we had to go through and fix. Well, now we don't have to do this anymore, right? Because like, yes, we could go through and write everything down, but how much more powerful is it if I send a Loom video and actually show on screen, like, this is the things I would change, and here's where you need to put this in the software. Like, I could go make them figure it out, but if we're just trying to get more efficient, like, let's just send a Loom video of like, here's the things that I see, so that that can live forever. We actually created a video library so if I'm giving points back to Lizbeth, for example, who's my staff person, well, now the next person, now Claudia, when she's doing the same type of tax return, can refer back to that. So we can title, how to input a W-2, something like that. And then that they can refer back to that video library. That's been really awesome for us. We've also leveraged a lot of our tech and software partners for this. So for example, all of our people go through the QBO Pro Advisor training. They all go through the online resources for LaCert Tax Prep. And there's tons of other. Gusto has their people advisory program that's been great for learning payroll. So I would also leverage those as much as you can, and create links to training. So this is even part of our onboarding, is that we have the links to all these external training resources as we go. And we do make sure to include them whenever we onboard a new app, like the whole team's included on that, or anybody that's actually going to be working in that app is included in that onboarding with any new apps that we have.
And then I can't speak for all of the offshore staffing agencies, but I can certainly speak for Cadencia, and I can certainly speak for my prior firm and most of the bigger companies. They enable and allow peer-to-peer training among staff, and we certainly encourage that at Cadencia, right? So if someone's struggling with a depreciation schedule and they're like, I don't understand, this half-life, and we have Slack channels where they can reach out to their peers and say, hey, so you get that same benefit, right? And again, that's one of the differences. You could hire a couple people in the Philippines by themselves working in their kitchen, but they're not going to have that peer-to-peer training and resources. And again, if you think about, because how I learned was exactly that, walking down the hall, tail between my legs, saying, could someone please explain this to me because I don't get it? And then that's how it's that cultural knowledge that is allowed along with and in addition and augmenting the videos and the training programs that each firm has. The other thing that we do is if someone happens to be coming to Guadalajara to give training, so I'm going to come and give training on revenue recognition. If the firm wants, they'll invite anyone who's around and come sit down on the training, right? Because like, look, I'm not sharing any firm secrets by talking about rev rec or about, accounting for nonprofits. So sure, why not, share the knowledge that I have.
Yeah, really good point. And the only other thing I would add to that, and I love the peer-to-peer idea, and for one big reason specifically, is that honestly, like for someone like me that's been doing this a long time, it's better to have someone who learned it recently teach it than to have me teach it, because sometimes I can't even remember how I learned it. So it's better for the folks that have maybe within the last year or two have been learning it, so they can be a little closer to the action for the new folks that come on. Okay, so the third mistake, and I feel like we see this a lot. There's going to be cultural differences if you're working with someone who's in another country, even if it's as close as someplace like Mexico, that in a lot of ways we can feel like it's really similar to US culture, but it's not in every way. And then like for India and the Philippines, there's a lot of big cultural differences. And so for us, one of the big things is just being aware of their local holidays. And again, this is kind of the fun part too, because we have our team. If there's a holiday that they're celebrating, we don't know what it is, we ask them to explain it to us. Like, why do you celebrate this? Who is Benicio Juarez? And why are we, celebrating his birthday today? Like, we want to understand that. But it's also good to be aware of any religious norms. A lot of these countries are a lot more conservative than we are in the US, have different ideas about the roles of men and women in society. So it really behooves us to educate ourselves about where our folks are coming from, just to be able to have that perspective. And so I think it's a good idea too, as much as possible, to know who you're working with. Make sure the company that you're working with is aligned with your core values and you with theirs. And the best way to do that is really getting to know their leadership team. Ideally, get to know other clients, because it's really great to connect with other firms who are doing the same thing, especially with the same partner that you're working with. You can get so much benefit for solving some of these problems. And Martin talked about training is one big aspect to it, or like how you teach and sharing resources. Like, we've just seen so much lift coming from just partnering with our outsourced partner, and then also the other firms that are working with that partner.
Couldn't agree more. And love this one. And what's interesting, and you'll see a through line here in all these mistakes and then the best practices surrounding them, is honestly, they're just mistakes they're techniques on how to run a really good firm and highly profitable and best of the best category firm. Because really, again, ignoring cultural differences happens in the States. You just may not be aware of it as much, right? So, and I know because this is back before I was managing partner, I just had someone on my team who was Seventh-day Adventist, and I'm like, well, come work on a Saturday. And they're like, you don't really get it, do you? And I'm like, well, come work on a Saturday. So again, it happens, but I think it's easier. It gets dulled and blunted, but it doesn't mean, again, that the impact isn't the same. So, and I'll echo what Kristen said. We're better for it by understanding the differences and the different approaches. And sometimes it's actually quite fascinating. The questions that we'll get from our Mexican staff, for instance, on a tax return, understanding, well, why is there a penalty for marriage? I don't understand that. And we're like, oh, well, actually, that's a really good question. I mean, there's a lot of things that they will ask the question, or why is this business doing it this way rather than this way? Oh, well, because they've always done it. But so bringing that fresh culture, that fresh, different way of looking at things, really ends up, I think, again, making you and your firm and your team better. And again, by welcoming, and I'll tell I've told this story before, but I love telling it. So I was explaining Thanksgiving to one of our team members in Guadalajara, Mexico, and she's like, well, Martin, because we're like, well, you can work on Thanksgiving, but all of our U.S. firms will be closed. She's like, well, Martin, tell me about Thanksgiving. I'm like, well, we get together, we break bread, we celebrate friendship and family, we have a wonderful meal, and we give thanks. And she looked at me, she's like, Martin, she's like, in Mexico, that's every day. Like, you need one day to do that? I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. So it's just, I love the different perspectives, and they're learning from us and we're learning from them. And again, because I'm a capitalist at heart, it makes your firm better, it makes your firm more profitable, it makes it run faster. So there's, again, these are some of the hidden benefits that I didn't realize when I first started the journey in India, gosh, probably close to 20 years ago now.
It's too bad we don't have the slide of us singing in front of the crowd in India when we did our rendition of Margaritaville. Fun fact, they don't know the song Margaritaville in India.
They do not.
That's a story.
They do not know Jimmy
day.
Buffett in India.
Okay, so this is a big one for me personally. We see this mistake. I've made this mistake. It's easy to forget about folks that aren't sitting there in your office or down the hall from you. So make sure that you are including your outsourced team as part of your team. So what could this mean? So I think it's really easy to have a person that's doing work for you, and maybe you, especially if you do have a really great system or process where they get assigned work and they just need to log in and they'll see everything that they need to work on. But really, if you want everything to run smoothly, everything works better if people feel like they're a part of something bigger. So we suggest that for larger firms, that means they designate a team champion in the US. And Martin, you can probably talk a little more about like, what does that mean, a team champion? What do we look for in that?
So a team champion, think about it, it's the switch. So you've got your offshore team, you've got your US team, and they're the person charged with understanding both. So ideally it's someone who's been with the firm a long time, knows, because again, maybe going back to the previous slide when we talk about cultural differences, one of the biggest places with hidden cultural norms is every accounting firm in the US, right? They all have different ways of doing things. They all, and think about, again, so you're coming from whether it's the Philippines or India or Mexico, and you're like trying to understand US systems, then you're trying to understand that particular firm and how they do things. And they do things because that's the way they do things. So having that liaison who understands and loves the team in India, Philippines, Mexico, and who also understands the firm, they're the translator, the switch. They're also the person saying, so-and-so's not busy enough. Oh, don't forget, you can send this. And I know that there are firms in larger firms for whom this role is an equity partner role, right? Because it's certainly profitable enough for the firm. So there is enough economic benefit and power in this role that's as important a partner role as being a line partner and out there doing audits or tax returns.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine like if you're big enough firm that you actually create this outsourced team, but like the work isn't going there. It's a whole job in and of itself to kind of sell the idea, make sure it works from within the firm to try to execute that strategy. And then, I think a good question to ask too, on the outsourcing partner side, is there someone, depending on how everything is set up, is there someone who, if you have a problem, if you have an issue, if you feel like something isn't working, is there someone that's not your staff person that you can discuss that with? Is there a liaison with that partner that will work with you and help you to really smooth things out and make sure that it's as successful as it possibly is? And so I think that's always a great thing to vet out as you're looking with partners on an outsource engagement. And then, of course, you're going to want to have your regular check-ins and meetings. I think most outsourcing partners that are worth their salt are going to make sure that they're checking in with you and making sure that you're providing evaluations, making sure that you're giving that staff feedback. But it's always good to just have your own regular check-ins to make sure that your own goals are getting accomplished and that you're giving that feedback as well.
And I want to highlight, or I guess brag on Kristen, because her team in Mexico, they might as well be in Kristen's office next door. They know their mission. They know what Kristen wants, where she wants to go with the firm. They know Kristen's core values. They know the firm's core values. They are Sherwood Tax. They just happen to be located in Guadalajara or neighboring areas. And that is intentional on Kristen's part. And that's what I would recommend if you really want to get the most out of your team, lean in and, if you have a Monday morning huddle, invite them. If you have committees, if you have a culture committee or a fun committee or something like that, include them, have them sit in and participate with the other team members. I mean, anything that you do stateside, challenge yourself. How can I include my remote team in that conversation so that they really feel part of your firm? And I know and I'm not, I'm comparing and contrasting. I'm not certainly knocking different providers, but because especially if you're with a staff augmentation firm, the whole benefit of that is that they're part of your firm. They believe in what you're doing. That's when if you come to them and say, hey, can you crank this out? Mrs. Johnson, here she goes again. She's sending that last 1099. I know it's later than, it's always late. They're like, no problem. I know how Mrs. Johnson is. I'll get that. I'll stay and I'll make sure that 1040 gets done, right? Because they know that it's not just an assignment. It's a client and the person behind the client. That takes work. It takes effort, but the payoff is significant. The other thing I would share, now this is honestly a benefit of being in Guadalajara, Mexico, or for other LATAM outsourced providers, get them on a plane, invite them to, and we do have clients who, we have people who have been to Oregon, they've been to Texas, they've been to the meeting in Las Vegas. Include them in if you have a big tax season kickoff, it's not that expensive. And especially if you're flying someone in from Oklahoma City, who's a remote person, fly them in from Mexico. Most of our team have visas. If they don't, we as soon as they start, we work on the process to get them visas. They're thrilled to be able to come and meet with you in person. And again, for them, that means that it's not just a flat screen that they're getting the information from. It's actually a human, and a human to human. That's where you get the results.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because this whole time we've been talking about remote work and we've been talking about processes, but gosh, there's nothing like meeting somebody in person, to really form that bond, that you would with other coworkers. If you think about us working in the office, we might go get a drink afterwards. We might meet someone's family at a picnic or something like that. And so, yeah, how can we kind of forge those bonds? And, Martin, you said you visited the India team, as did I. So it's not impossible. It can be done. I know it's a little harder to get the India folks here than maybe the folks from Mexico, but I know other firms that work with the Philippines. I know some of the Philippines operations will have an annual meeting, and some of the other Indian outsourcers do too. So I know it's expensive and I know it's a big time commitment, but I just can't. There's a reason why Martin went as a partner 17 times. Because there's a benefit to doing it, that bond that it creates, that really knowing the folks that you're working with, knowing what they can do and bringing that value back to the firm obviously was worth it because you kept going back. So it must have been worth it for you to keep going. And I know it wasn't because of the food.
No, no, or the 24-hour, 30 hours of being in the air. But yes, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, Chris. It is both ways, right? Have your team come to visit you stateside, sometimes harder with some of the providers, but get on a plane. You're right, Kristen. All the big ones have, and some of them I hear are amazing meetings. Go to the annual meeting, take your team out to dinner, embarrass yourself on, playing cricket or, whatever the local tradition is. Embarrass yourself by eating food that's way too spicy, and they'll laugh at you. And that will, again, that bond, that feeling that you're right there with them, will just it again will pay significant dividends. And as a quick plug, Guadalajara is a great place to visit.
It really is. Yeah. Compared to that 24-hour flight, it is a nice jaunt to get to Guadalajara, and it's beautiful and fun. And yeah, we could go on about that for a long time. We'll do our sales pitch for Cadencia in another video, but exactly. All I'm going to say is Tequila Train. That's all I'm going to say. And then I'll just leave it there. Okay. We did have a question come in that we can address real quick. What do you wish you had done differently in building an offshore team? So I can answer that. And then Martin, you really built a big one. So I'd be interested to hear what you say. I think my main thing that I learned since I started hiring for myself is I really have gotten clear about a job description. Because I think originally I came at it, I need a bookkeeper or I need a tax preparer. But the more I did it and had people fail out, by the way. So I told you I've got 4 people on my team now from Guadalajara. I believe I've let go of 4 people in the last 3 years. So this wasn't without some failure. So I definitely know what my webinar topic's about. So, and it's because I like people, and people always show up well, when they come for an interview, but I wasn't specific enough in the actual skills that I wanted, and really making sure that those folks that I was hiring could fit that specific skill set that I needed. So I would say that was my major mistake that I made. And Probably the other ones that, just like we said at the beginning, that I've been working on for the last 3 years is building up those processes, building up the onboarding, doing all those things. I wish I had had that 3 years ago. So you're welcome. What say you, Martin?
I would say, and you mentioned this earlier, start with strategy, right? Start with, it's not just, yeah, we're gonna give this a shot and add a couple people. If this is really worth doing, then it's worth doing well, and probably hiring, I wouldn't say overhire, but it's hard to start with one person, right? That's not a team. That's a solo. I mean, lots of firms start with one, and that's fine. But had I done it differently in my old environment, I would have started with a bigger team and said, okay, here we go. This is a strategy. We're buying in on this. We're all in. And because I will tell you, fast forward, it's been wildly successful for the firm that it was at. But it probably took 5 years longer than it should have, maybe longer, because of that, right? They didn't start with that overall strategic mission. So I would start with strategy and then get buy-in. And if you don't get buy-in from significant buy-in from your entire firm, especially bigger firms, I don't know if I'd bother. Right? I mean, people may disagree with me, and they say, "Well, just start with one little division and then grow it." But in fact, I had a partner who kept kind of me and say, "Martin, this is just a hobby, right? This is not a strategy. It's just a hobby." And that really stuck with me. And, I did what I could to, and ultimately the lift occurred, but man, it took a while.
I think that, and being a part of that firm for the short period of time that I was, I think what made the difference in, like, they theoretically had the strategy, right? But it was that commitment to strategy. And there was a few that became evangelistic supporters of it, right? And so that's where that like champion role came in, but also even folks like me that just started using it, and then like it was a game changer for them. So I think that's like the exception. If you can have some really vocal folks who feel comfortable, really evangelizing this and getting this out to the rest of the firm, then fine. But yeah, you have to get some level of commitment, because it's worse than not doing it at all, right? If you try it and it fails or it doesn't get that support in the firm.
Yeah.
Because then you always get that, well, we tried it once thing. We tried it once and it didn't work out. Yeah. Which, by the way, people don't say that about any other role, right? I tried to hire a receptionist and it didn't work out. So I'm never doing that again.
I'll never have a receptionist. It's like, that one was maybe one of my biggest pet peeves, is that, well, one time you should have seen the return I got back, and it was just a mess. So I'll never do it again. Right. So, and again, like Kristen said, if you thought of your own staff that way, you'll never hire staff. And then why be in business?
Exactly. Just shutter it now. No. Okay. So 5th mistake. Oh, we better start talking faster. Okay. So not clearly defining roles and expectations. I alluded to this in the question that we got. So this was probably my biggest mistake that I made. So like I said, the more specific you can be in that job description, the better. Make sure that when you are hiring that person, there is that culture and values fit, because again, they're going to be a part of your team. And even if this is for, an outsourced team that you might just have a team lead, or maybe there's just one person that you're dealing with over there that might have a team of their own, I believe it's still very, very important that provider lines up with your core values. So for example, if a core value in your firm is that you don't want to overwork your staff, but then you hire an outsourced provider that has folks working 80 hours a week, is that really someone that you want to work with? So that alignment to me anyway is super important. And then anyone that you're going to be interacting with on a regular basis, you want to make sure that everyone's aligned and that you all understand each other's culture going back and forth. And the other thing that I've had to do too, and again, this takes some work on the front end, is what does the next level look like? So it's one thing of like, we talk a lot about like getting started. Here's how the hurdles that you get over. But then what? A year or two down the road, they're humans just like everybody else. They want a path for growth. They want a path for development. So what does that look like in your firm? What does a level 1 staff person look like? And what does it take to get to level 2? What does it take to get from 2 to 3? And so on. What does it look like to be a client manager? Because ideally, in an ideal world, these people are going to stay with your firm for a long time, and they're going to need that path to growth. And if you're working with a larger provider that's working with a team, I would want to understand what's the path for growth in their team and what does that mean to my firm? Does that mean if, Selva gets promoted from a staff person to a senior, is Selva still going to be on my job, or am I going to get another staff person at that point and Selva's going to supervise that? Like, I want to make sure that I understand what that path for promotion looks like for the team.
Couldn't agree more.
Any other thoughts on that? I don't know how you've seen it work, Martin, in the different venues.
I think that the big one is the looking at the crystal ball, right? Like what's going to happen in 5 years? What's going to happen in 3 years? Now you can hire just the success of people to put numbers on a form, right? Our training, this training today isn't really about that, because Kristen and I, if you think about Kristen's initial on her introductory slide, it's to bring joy to accounting. Well, having people who spend their entire, there are people in other big outsourced providers that will just do nothing but do cash all day long, right? And they'll get really, really good at one part of the audit, and that's it. Well, that I don't know if that it makes anybody feel great. So in this case, we're talking about how do you define roles and expectations of your staff person who just happens to be located in the Philippines, and you look them in the eye and say, I expect you to be here in 10 years. What is that going to look like?
Yeah, agreed.
And again, I'll just maybe highlight, the managing partner in me can't help myself. Again, mistake number 5, really no different stateside than it is offshore, right? I mean, it's just, how do you become a best of the best firm? Yep.
Good point. Okay, lack of feedback is mistake number 6. We talked about this a little bit earlier with training, but this also goes with, kind of setting those expectations. What does it take to get to the next level? I say, don't put them in virtual solitary confinement. Don't just sometimes I would hear the phrase, oh, we're going to send that work to India. Yeah. And nothing bothered me more, because these are like human people. It's not just sending it to India. Like, let's talk about what that looks like. I'm saying Zoom, Slack, anything that you can really create that feedback loop. Now, we've talked about our team Guadalajara. It's nice that they're virtually in the same time zone as us, but it takes a little more work. But I would advocate for, whenever you can, trying to have real time, at least, even if it's once every couple of weeks or once a month, if you've got someone that you're working with in the Philippines or India, there is some overlap, so maybe it means you work a little later and they get up a little earlier, but it's definitely worth that time to create that space to have the immediate feedback and really, touching base on the projects that they're working on. We do it daily, but just because we can. But I would think, if you've got ongoing projects, especially if you're working on tax returns, you're going to want to know where projects are, where people are stuck, what can we help with on a pretty regular cadence. And yes, that can be done asynchronously too, but I put value in trying to connect at least periodically in real time if possible.
And in this one, and Kristen, because I get your feedback all the time. Kristen's very good at feedback, but it's really perfecting how you give feedback, because it's easy to be like, well, blah, 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 blah. And for those of you who are trying, like me and Kristen, trying to learn a second language, right, recognize, and again, that may be no different than your first year staff person who's down the hall, but they nod their head and they smile and they say, yeah, got it, okay. And they maybe have 50, maybe 25% of the concept that you've said. So in your feedback, make sure that it's clear, have that conversation. We talk about, and I said it before, the callback, so if you think about, if you're a aircraft controller and a pilot, and the control tower says, turn Delta left 4, the pilot says, Roger, Delta left 4. So I told you something. And so, when you give feedback, okay, tell me what I just said. Did you understand it? It's more important for a virtual team or a offshore team. But again, it's really the same. And this is as good a time as any to throw in. Also, just remember that we have our own weird language and lingo in accounting, right? So imagine, I don't know what the Spanish equivalent, but if you tell someone to tie down the balance sheet, that means absolutely nothing to them, right? And it means something to me too. But so recognizing as you say these things that really ask yourself, am I being clear at what I'm asking and what the feedback I'm giving?
I'm so glad I should have put a bullet point for this, Martin, because you're so right. What I have learned that I need to do is speak more slowly, because again, learning a language, and this has been so huge for me to try to learn Spanish. I'm 4 years in and I barely sound like a toddler, so I can't even imagine how the folks communicate with us in English the way that they do. It just gives me so much respect. But the idioms and the phrases, sometimes you'll see them get lost in something that you said, because maybe you spit out like a little turn of phrase like we like to use. So, now we kind of use it as a fun thing, because I'll say, do you guys have a phrase like this? And so they'll tell me something that they say, and then it ends up being another conversation that ends up being kind of funny. But thank you for pointing that out. Language barrier is a thing. Even with the best of the English speakers, we'll throw out some colloquial phrase that maybe even if someone's in Arizona, they wouldn't know what we were talking about. So be mindful about that. Thank you. Great point. Okay, so that was all the mistakes we could think of that would fit in an hour-long webinar. We'll be happy to share ours more, and feel free to. We're going to put up our contact information at the end. Feel free to. I'd love to see you guys on LinkedIn. Martin and I are both on there. Would love to continue the conversation there. I know we have a couple more questions coming in that we can address, but really what we want to get across is that outsourced staffing is still a great answer. It can still be a part of the long-term strategy of your firm. We believe in it obviously so wholeheartedly that we started a company around it, and we want to make sure that it's done right and the way that we want to bring joy to the industry, like we said at the beginning. So Megan had asked a question, that we get this a lot, regarding best practices for handling security and remote access. And we get this question a lot, and it's really hard to answer because every firm is different. And I'll give you the broad brush answer, which may or may not satisfy you. Feel free to chime in again if you want. But really what I ended up doing, what a lot of firms do, is whatever we're doing stateside, I have an IT professional that I work with that I make sure he's great with whatever we've set up. There's some firms that have their own internal IT people. Specifically for Cadencia, we also have an IT specialist there that implements all the security protocols, that sets up their hardware, that does all those things. And I imagine all the other outsourced companies are the same. So I make sure that they talk to each other. So I make sure my guy, Danny, is talking to Eduardo, who is the IT guy in Guadalajara. And so if Danny gives me the thumbs up and he's doing everything right and everything is going to talk to each other. Now, of course, we've got the 2FA in process, everything that we do the phishing tests, we do all the security trainings, all of that. I'm not using any VPNs. Everything is cloud-based. I am basically my team in Guadalajara has the same level of trust that I have with any of my other employees, US, in the office or remote. That's just me and what I've chosen to do. So Martin, I know you've seen other firms and how they address this too. Would love your perspective on that question.
I love the question, Megan. Thank you for asking. And yes, there will be some firms that don't allow printers, and you have to lock your cell phone in a locker, so you can't somehow take a picture of someone's information. I did this in India and I did this in Mexico. I found that dehumanizing, and at the end of the day, that's the same risk of your stateside staff, right? And so we do it with background checks, really, really thorough background checks, culture, and just kind of the management by walking around, making sure we're observing all the time. And then, at the end of the day, in this business, we have to trust the people that are preparing the returns. And we have the same philosophy, whether that happens to be, again, in Tallahassee or in Guadalajara. Some firms do require a different, okay, they can't have access to a printer. That's fine. You can add all the layers that you want, but the overall risk is, because it's a human-based risk. If you can take care of all the penetration testing, the 2FA, everything like that, then it's really just about selecting the right people.
Yeah, agreed. And Martin had a question about FTC safeguards. I'm going to be honest, like, I don't know what that is. I'm relying on that we follow like the IRS standards and the AICPA standards. And so I'm relying on my team to implement that. So Martin, I don't know if you have specific.
I'll thank you. Thank you, other Martin. I'll have to take a look. I know that in this case, this practice is HIPAA compliant and has our IT person does all the things. I'm not familiar with the FTC standards safeguards rules.
Okay, sorry, Martin. We'll work on that. We'll get back to you. Okay, so this is a quote from another friend of mine, Matthew May. They also are great outsourcers over at Acuity. He says, don't be afraid of offshore. It's just people. So that kind of goes to our last point. You know, I think we get all twisted up about security and the background checks, and it feels weird because we're, you know, it's foreigners and it's, you know, people that aren't here, but people are people, you know, and sometimes what I've said is, you know, I don't know that I'm any more likely to hire someone who's, you know, doing criminal things or doing untrustworthy things in Mexico versus actually, you know, right here in Oregon. So yeah, like Martin says, people risk. And if we can't take a people risk, then we just have to be solo practitioners, I guess. So here's our contact info. We've got our socials on there. You can follow us on all of them. Actually, I don't have my LinkedIn on there, but you can find me. I don't think there's many Kristen Keatses out there. And there's only one Martin Moll, as far as I know. There was another one, but he just died. So and he spelled it.
I didn't know that.
He did. He just passed away. Okay, so unless you guys have any other questions, I think we can wrap it up. We can get Joel to jump back on and talk about your CPE. And I want to thank everyone for coming, and anyone that wasn't here live, I appreciate you listening, and hopefully we can get those CPE credits for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin and Kristen, for a wonderful webinar today. And if you are curious about CPE, watch the video just after I'm done talking. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day.
Today's event has ended. To earn CPE, go to earmark.app or scan the QR code on the screen. Then log in or create your free account. Search for the course by tapping on the magnifying glass icon on the home screen and then entering the name of this event. It takes a few days to make the course, so if you're attending this event live, keep an eye out for an email letting you know when the course is available. Pass the quiz to earn your CPE, then tap the button to email yourself a certificate. Stay tuned for more events from Earmark. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.